All right. We'll call the April 16th meeting of the Bend Landmarks Commission into order. First off, we will have a roll call. Yeah, that's right. Used to do it with people yelling out. Let's see. Well, I can't. Sean, yes. Sean, are you here?
Present.
Sean's here.
Here.
Jim?
Here.
Heidi?
Here?
God. Kathy?
Good job. Here.
I'm so bad at names. And I am here as well. So we do have quorum and we got a full house. And as to visitors, I think this at this point would come down to anyone online.
Trying to promote. Are there any visitors?
We're looking. Nope.
Okay, no.
Nope.
It's too nice an evening.
It is a barn burner tonight. Okay. We have approval of the minutes.
I move to approve the minutes as submitted.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
No, second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Minutes are approved as presented.
Thank you.
Just looking right along. What is the fun part here? The election of chair and vice chair for 2024. Now's when it gets done.
To nominate Derek Stevens as chair.
I am going to LBJ it again. I cannot accept, nor will I.
Wow.
Yeah. We, last meeting, I mentioned the fact that Beverly and I are working on building a place and we are moving away. So I will not be here for continuity of the committee. I think it need fall in more stable hands. I handed that one to you. I'd, love to see if Jim would be interested in.
Well, actually, I'm not that excited about doing it. I've served as chair on too many other commissions and committees. And I'm of that presidential age that it's probably time for me to step down from leadership roles. I'm happy to support someone who would like to gain the experience of running a committee.
So eloquently stated. Thank you, Jim.
He's the only one who got my LBJ reference to.
What about Tom?
What about Andy?
He's not here.
Let's nominate him.
Makes him a likely candidate.
Yeah. Mm,
He has subbed for you,
good point.
so he has previous experience.
Yeah, yeah.
Then I would go ahead. I'd like to nominate Andy.
Is he reachable by phone?
He had an emergency tonight.
Oh,
So, I mean, we could table this till next month and I could contact him and tell him what the wish list was.
Departing the commission.
as soon as possible. We're working on the process right now. We've got a little bit to do legwork wise.
Would you still be around next month if we had to table this chair and vice chair?
Possibly. It's about 50-50 that I'd be here. Honestly. Just not so much for the month, but even just on that day.
Mhm.
So I don't know yet.
Sean, do you have any interest in stepping up to chair?
Welcome to the commission, by the way.
Thank
Well,
Are you a
okay,
voting
so
member?
he's not,
Okay,
and neither are you, but
Right.
everybody else is.
that's why I'm not
I was
nominating
about to
myself.
pick on
Yeah.
Kathy too.
I don't know enough to run it. I,
It's never stopped me.
You're
I
all
propose
right.
we table this till next month.
yeah, I would love to see Andy. Take it.
I suggest if no one accepts a nomination, we put names in a hat. Or draw straws.
Or the last person who shows up.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Last person through the door.
Yeah,
Okay,
well, it seems like a moldy albatross we're trying to hand off here. No, no, really. It's really nice.
It's fun
It's
to be
really,
the chair.
it is a good learning experience.
yeah.
It's, it's worth doing if you
Yeah.
haven't done it before.
Mhm.
You've
Been a chair of a committee. It was
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah, and Kathy and Tom, one of the two of you battling it out for vice chair, it's
Yeah.
a good stepping stone. Yeah.
It's okay to table it and I
Shall
can,
we, what's the consensus of the committee? Shall we table it for a month?
See,
So we have nods in agreement, although she might be trying to get used to her glasses.
I can't vote.
Okay.
It just seemed very agreeable.
Very agreeable today. Gonna make myself sick.
We are clicking through it. Okay, we have a discussion of the Bend Historic Code Audit Project Materials created by Peter Meyer, architect. And that is to Heidi Kennedy.
Yeah. So we didn't have a meeting last month. We did not have a meeting. Okay. Sorry. Thanks. So we did not have a meeting last month, but the meeting previously, Peter came from Portland and had some information and we kind of went over that, but this is really the first time where we can kind of roll up our sleeves and look at that. With the documents that I did not include in the agenda, I think everyone has gotten these previously, but it's the scope of the audit project and some of the background comments and ideas, even some comments from Jerry that I think I shared with everybody when we were getting started. So it's kind of like the background stuff. If we need to, that's the first thing in your packet. If we need to refer back to that. But I put together his three different separate documents that he put together in the order what I thought was good, which was the full code with some, general feedback and guidance through all the pages. And then the second thing he presented was the design review criteria, which is the meat of everything and with lots of feedback and comments. And then he also included his third document, the idea for some drawings and design review pictures to include with a code update potentially. So I thought it would be helpful to kind of go through it page by page or comment by comment. And then I could do some collecting. And I just really want to get started rolling up our sleeves and kind of going through that. And that would be my recommendation, but I'm open to whatever anybody else would like to do.
Maybe we dig into the 10.20, 130 design review
Okay.
criteria.
Like, let's go into the deep end.
Jump in.
Jump in.
This section is what's historically caused us a lot of issues with reviewing documents or applications. Because it's very broad. And so I think over the years, you've collected a lot of input and a lot of input from newer commission members.
Yes. And it's subjective. It's so subjective. And if there are things that we could do to kind of clean it up or help define, more current goals of things. I mean, things have changed since this was written quite a bit and just in general in life. So
Do we have money in the grant to have Peter make a design guideline document for our code?
not this one, but we would the next cycle,
Okay,
which is a little bit less than a year from now. I
Yeah.
think if we could focus on the preservation
Perfect.
code language
Mhm.
and then look at doing phase 2,
Okay.
basically. That's my idea.
yeah, there are a lot of CLGs around the country that have graphic guidelines, so I mean, we may be able to just borrow,
Mhm.
copy from them.
Yeah.
I myself have provided graphic guidelines for the city of Enterprise. Different because it was a downtown historic core, but those are essential to the benefit of applicants
Mhm.
moving forward to supplement what's written here. So big advocate in favor of those graphic guidelines.
Yeah, and so that's what he's put together as an example of what he wants, and he really tried to use examples of styles that are in the district currently, you know, in the last couple pages that he had when he could find them. But that would be helpful, because that first sentence in there about shall be compatible with adjacent historic buildings, you know, it's so broad. You know, and I think he has a good recommendation for graphic guidelines, you know, to help people. Heidi, have you seen them in a separate document, or is it part of the preservation code?
A
I
lot
mean-
of times it's a separate document because it's not codified language, they're guidelines. So they're not actually in the Ben code.
Okay,
They're just a supplement that says, you know, your graphic design guidelines.
you know, from a planning standpoint, there's issues with that, and you know, that it's not the code, you know, and it's not got a lot of teeth.
Yep,
So.
but it is
that's-
subjective. It's to help
Yeah,
visually
give
describe.
people
Yeah.
guidelines to what they're gonna be able to get through, passed by the commission, yeah. Okay,
We used to, well, when I say we used to, I think it was when it was still Deschutes County landmarks. We had something from the national, from Department of Interior. It would have blockscapes and it would show the different heights and how quite often the corners were often more developed, but the height and massing was more the body of the block. And so it gave a guideline as to this is how we look at it as fitting in the neighborhood. And there were little drawings of a block front, and there were,
That was in the code.
yeah,
Right? It
Yeah.
was, yeah.
but I think it was under Deschutes County that we
Yeah.
had it. It didn't roll over. But all those graphics,
do you think it's in the code still, in the county
No.
code?
probably in the county.
In the county
I
code?
can imagine no,
I don't think it is. I
haven't
think the county
looked at the county
code, because
code
we
in ages.
we helped rewrite the county code when we split off to Bend.
Mm,
And so it was the same thing.
okay,
But thinking about that, those graphic illustrations are what I did in Enterprise, and it was their downtown design, but it was called a design guideline
yeah.
and not their code.
Okay,
I can look into that.
Yeah, National Parks
Okay.
had all of that.
Yeah.
And it had commercial, it had residential, it had the idea between neighborhood commercial and residential, the blending in some of the older neighborhoods. And it did have the idea of height, massing, streetscape, street sides, size and sidewalks and all of it.
I wonder, so you think that maybe there's already in existence as one of the briefs for the National Park Service?
It's probably in one of my file boxes buried for the last 20 years. from
It's not in a
Deschutes.
preservation brief.
Okay, it's not,
But it was a separate guideline document.
Don Stevens and John Scholes and I went to a thing in Eugene.
Mhm.
That was planning for a historic planning seminar. And we received it in a package.
Huh.
Uh,
You think it would be on the National Park Service website somewhere, but
should-
not underneath the briefs.
Yeah.
About massing and scale.
Mexican scale, and also had a lot of the stuff in this next section of it. It had I'm doing this from memory, that's why I'm kind of skipping around. It had the recommended, not recommended for masonry sandblasting and all those kind of things.
Well, those are in the briefs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They have been in the briefs, but,
But yeah, in the folder they gave us in Eugene, it was in there too.
okay,
Yeah, it seems to me that it was something similar to that, and I'm all in favor of graphic standards as a guideline, if it can't be encoded, just because sometimes, compatible with adjacent buildings. I mean, there could be an adjacent building that's been heavily modified
Right.
prior to the historic
The
district.
language actually says those that, those historic contributing in the neighborhoods or, that kind of thing. So,
But I think there may be something similar in the city of Portland. I remember coming across it, doing work for Portland Parks in the Lads Edition
mhm.
neighborhood.
Mm.
They had very strict standards about what could
Yeah.
and couldn't be done. And I know elsewhere in their code, there are graphics for landscape and other things to help people at least visualize it. It could go a long way, at least to alleviating some of the confusion that comes in with
For
lay
the peop-
clients and lay people.
The person that's doing the one project,
Yeah.
it doesn't have a background. The other, so. The other word in this first, sentence, two sentences, it's one long sentence, is character of the surrounding area and defining what area means. I mean, I think that the commission has, depending on if it's a unique architectural style on a particular property, looked at other places in town that wasn't even in the district, but somewhere in Bend, like we had similar architecture, or, there was some mid-century questions that came up, and we looked at some historic non-altered buildings that are outside of the district. But what does area mean, surrounding area? And that's the one time I went to Luba and back, I think was an issue about that. It's like, how big are your blinders?
Oh, I see things like, at what time?
Mhm.
I've helped rewrite the environmental codes, city of Portland, and the environmentalists that were always saying it's gotta be native plants. And I say to them,
What
at
time?
what point in time?
Mhm.
This, you go back millennia and, it might be actually eons or periods. It would be a fern forest.
Yeah.
So,
You are going back.
Yeah, and so like if you have a 1920s house that was remodeled in the 40s and then in the 60s, they're all historic time periods.
Yeah.
Historic character, well, which one do you go back to? Is there enough coffee? I can get some more.
Oh, I just drank,
Okay.
You're pretty bad for drinking that coffee.
I've been in construction for 40 years. I've done a lot worse.
Kathy, would you like some coffee? I'm gonna make some more.
Are you gonna make some?
Yeah, we can.
Yeah, I can do that.
All right.
You're doing your
Thanks.
seminar.
Okay, so that's a really a good question, I think, that comes up about the character is the area, and I would love to see us kind of rewrite that section so it's more,
couldn't, several ways. You could replace area with the district.
Mhm.
So that narrows the boundary to a certain,
Or historic districts. And
Right,
there are examples in Drake that would work for Old Town and vice versa. So within the historic districts or historic properties,
which works for
contributing historic properties around town.
those within district, but what about your standalone National Register?
Actually.
Other listed properties, something like that?
Exactly. I mean, I'm trying to think of one of the City of Bend standalones right now.
lots of them downtown.
Yeah, I was thinking the Dutch on, is it Hastings or
Yep.
it was a Gary Johansson project, but that would also be able to be referred back over to the district for area. So,
Okay,
I mean, in theory, you're compatible with,
districts and contributing listed properties.
yeah.
let's say.
What about
The
the
list of
outliers?
historic properties throughout the city of Bend.
What about the outliers though? Like if you do have a mid-century downtown and there's nothing else in the district?
Well, they should
Or,
be historic anyhow.
hey. Oh, this
Um,
isn't,
Actually, mid-century stuff. There are good examples of it over in Drake.
Yeah.
So that would fall back into the historic districts and or properties listed. Yeah, but we also have to look at the idea that we would like to have people bring their homes into the National Registry rather than not. So how do you account for all of it?
Well, I don't know, like, this would be on the plate if somebody wasn't listed, and if we were trying to persuade somebody with a carrot to get listed.
I like the direction Sean was going a moment ago. I mean, within the, within the district and other listed contributing, I don't know if you want to throw non-contributing in there, because
No, because they're gonna
Yeah,
use
no,
to a
no,
point
yeah.
that, well, we can do 3 stories and.
Yeah.
per-
Well, that's why I have any qualms about including examples from other districts. Because we have the district we've been seeing a lot of where it was bungalow homes for workers, which were small, as opposed to Drake Park and that area where that's where the bosses lived. And the homes are considerably larger and taller.
Mhm.
And so trying to use something in the Drake Historic District to compare to something in the Old Town or other district,
It's more modest.
could be used against the intent of the code.
Yeah,
True.
And that's good.
okay.
I think they're all good points, but I think we've hit upon some language
Yeah,
that could make it a lot more definite.
yeah,
Uh,
cleaner.
Yeah.
Okay. I got it. The next one is, new additions or construction shall be sized so the impact to the primary facade is kept to a minimum. Additions shall generally be located in the rear portion of the property or such locations where they have least visibility impact from public ways. I think that the commission's talked about, basically public right of ways versus alleys, and really the code doesn't, the way it's written, public way does not include an alley, so, but I think that there's been some discussions about it, maybe it should. Those are some things to talk about. That would be great if
Yeah.
get some feedback from the commission on.
Well, that's something I've felt strongly about, because we've seen some pretty ugly looking alley facing additions.
Mhm.
And I mean, alleys are part of the landscape. Your backyard is, a place where you might hang out more often than the front porch. And I think Peter had suggested some language in his edits to address that, of including, more than just right of ways.
Yeah, define, including alleys.
Including alleys.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, the last couple of ones we looked at where they were basically just 2-story cubes,
Mhm.
with little fenestration or, trim or anything to break up the facade. But because it wasn't viewed from
A public right of
a
way.
public right of way, there was no real hook to say, yeah, at least put an awning on there.
I think the properties that would impact the most would be those that have street frontage and alley frontage. Right, so then they'd be limited to the interior lot line against their neighbor, right? Be the biggest impact, otherwise, I don't think would be that significant.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it wouldn't, I don't think it would preclude people from developing towards the alleyway. It's just they'd have to pay as much attention to it as they would as
right.
developing to the front yard.
So that would be a big change, but that's something that we could look at is, adding alleyways to this one. Because it's really, later on, we have with the, also visible, like in landscape in the next one down, is visible from adjacent public streets, not alleys, so we've really tried to kind of stick to the front yard with the way the code is written now. And then what does kept to a minimum mean? That's very subjective too. That language that he's highlighted is difficult always when we struggle, with trying to help applicants and prepare something to come in front of you. We have to try to have findings for on designs.
With the new densities in Bend and the ability to do ADUs. And you start, if you look at the fact in a historic corner lot, we look at both the primary facade and the secondary facade on the corners. So that they are both of the keeping, in some cases, historic, when it is a landlocked parcel, primary facade, the sides are of little consequence. But with the higher densities that we're looking at through Old Town in particular, is there a piece of language to add that would give near primary facade status to the alleyways? As a nod towards where Jim's been going for a while, that the alleys are going to become almost a secondary to the Florida, Georgia and Delaware roads. That the alleyscape facade is treated with near primary facade reverence, something along those lines.
I think that's, I think that is. Like you said, we're just gonna be seeing more and more development in the rears. That would be good, I think, to include with some of the architecture exterior features section lower on down there. Maybe should think about that, keep that thought, and let's see if there's some language that we might be able to include there with the features.
Yeah, I think when I see the phrase kept to a minimum, I mean, that is so arbitrary.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd be inclined to put a percentage in there. I mean, do you want to see 50% of the front facade changed? Or 75% changed? I mean, what's minimum? Is minimum 5%?
Yeah.
I think giving a number that, then you have to figure out how do you go about measuring that? Do you do a block diagram and say, okay, you measure a square around the highest point and the widest points, the ground, and that's the facade square, or the area of impact of the facade. And then you say something to the effect of, okay, anything above 25% is not minimum.
And that's the front facade? You're not talking
Well,
about
any
the rear
facade you want to control. I think you'd be able to look at that structure, draw a rectangle or square, highest point, ridge line, furthest points, perimeter walls to ground, and say, this is the facade we're talking about. And the code allows you, up to 25%. I don't know that that's the right number. Up to 30, might be worthwhile drawing some rectangles around some houses that have been modified that we liked
And see what
the
we come up
percentage
with.
is.
What's the percent?
And then, because it gives, again, the homeowner or developer, a hard and fast target. And something that we don't have to be arbitrary on, staff doesn't have to worry about when making a staff report. You could show us the triangle, the rectangle, square, and say it meets the criteria or it doesn't.
I guess my question there would be on the rear facade, if they're adding an ADU, that's what we've been seeing lately. And if you walk down the alleyway and if that becomes a public right of way, then or a public viewing area, an ADU is gonna change the facade by better than 50%,
Well,
probably 60%
yeah.
in some instances. And so do we treat the front and back differently?
I think you very well could. It could be a different number for the front, the back, and sides. Because, I mean, again, I think I remember seeing at least one where there was a large blank wall facing the neighbor. Yeah, not particularly friendly, not particularly helpful to your neighbors. It may be efficient, but I think, again, I mean, that doesn't seem to be the character of the homes in that, in the district that we've been dealing with mostly. There's a lot of articulation. And maybe it's an accumulation of different height portions on that facade. In case they step down or have a extension out of a wall, a window seat or something that would break up the massing.
I suggest we go actually more broad in just new additions and construction shall be cited so that the impact to the primary facade is not jeopardized in its historic character. Because the goal is to keep our
Thank you.
primary facades unaltered. So the sense is you drive down Delaware Street and it looks essentially the same as it did 50 years ago. So instead of as a minimum, that it doesn't detract from all of its character defining features and I mean, just kind of a bigger, broader picture rather than a percentage. I'm afraid if we do a percentage, then people are gonna get nitpicky on, well, I'm only affecting this percentage. Well, that percentage is your quintessential character defining features of your, you know, you're taking out your massive, I don't know, if it was a Tudor, you're taking out your massive stone chimney off of the front facade. Well, that's only 25%. Right, like, you know, I
Oh,
just know how,
Yeah,
I know how those architects work.
I see where you're going with it.
Yeah,
I think the issue that I would, that someone could take with it, not necessarily myself, because I'm a broad constructionalist, not a strict constructionalist when it comes to things, is that how do you define, I mean, there's still some nebulous language in there about, you know, its impact,
Mhm,
and maybe that's the reason for the commission.
right.
But I have experienced, I was on City of Tuolumne's Planning and Design Commission. And our code at the time, for 8 years that I was there, was very liberal and gave us a lot of leeway. And we were happy to throw out some really ugly developments, a couple by the mayor, who later came to the city council and took away all of that broad language in the code. Because they were tired of dealing with us.
Mhm.
So I think, you know, and again, part of what I would like to see or help the public income is to understand more clearly. And when they see something, oh, well, and even as an architect, landscaper, you know, a consultant coming in with something that's, okay, this is totally up to the discretion of the commission.
yeah.
How do we plan for that? And how do you respond to that? And it puts a lot of onus on staff is to say, well, we think, you know, we've found based on, and you'd have to use examples kind of like you do now. But again, it goes back to having examples of what would be allowed. I think there's some middle ground somewhere in between there. I don't know what it is.
Okay.
I'd have to give it a lot more thought, and we don't want to be here that long.
New additions, new construction cited so that the impacts to the primary facade do not detract from the character defining features of the historic resource. And maybe there's another sentence that's, you know,
Oh.
a minimum percentage of,
That may, again, the percentage, if you say defining features, that covers the chimney.
question, right? It's only 10% they're changing, but that's the main thing that's
Yeah,
the
so,
design known for, the building.
yeah, so if you leave the language of defining features in there
Yeah.
and say you can't change more than this percentage of defining features. And,
Okay,
you know, because that's something that's measurable. And it may be, you know, in total or individually. You know, there may be a different number for individual features and a number for aggregate of defining features. So if there's a facade that has, you know, 3 different defining features that make this home significant or building significant, and there's a sub criteria of you can't change more than 25% of each one. You know, and they go 20% of each one, they've changed 60%
mhm.
of the facade. I don't know if the math actually works that way.
Gosh, I think about, like down the street on Broadway, Calivan's house, I believe, the big white house. They did a big ADU garage in the back and, you know, extensive decking, and so the front facade probably not changed a lot. Side facade, probably 50%, I'm guessing. Rear facade, probably 65%, when you look at it from the back. And so, but I think it was really well done. I mean, it fits in the neighborhood, it looks like it's been there forever. And so, again, I'm kind of having a hard time with the percentages. Or even an aggregate percentage, like how do you figure that on a project like that? And then there are a couple of other examples in the neighborhood where clearly the percentage was blown, a tiny little house and a massive addition behind it. So I guess I'm just having a hard time wrapping my head around the percentage language and how do you define that?
I'm gonna back up a little bit and tell you where all this verbiage came from. Just, we didn't, and I didn't write it. It wasn't just pulled out of a hat. This was, I believe it all came from the National Park Service at one time, design review criteria for alterations and additions. If you look at a number of the CLGs throughout the state and the nation, we all have the same language. So I just pulled up one, for instance, Baker City, and it's verbatim the same thing. I'm not saying we can't change it because we've been using it for a long time, but that's where it came from. So we all kind of started when the CLGs were initiated by the National Park Service down to the state level, down to the local level. We kind of were all given this language that we could use for our code, and then we've been editing it over time to make it appropriate to our districts. So I thought that might be helpful just because I was like, well, what does Baker City still say? Oh, it's exactly the same. They haven't changed it at all.
Kind of trying to wrap my.
They don't have a lot of development in Baker City, but not yet.
When somebody's changing or making changes to the primary facade or facades. Are we talking typically replacing materials that may be rotted? Or what kind of situations are we most, or have you seen most commonly seen historically where those changes are being made?
Windows.
Windows, yeah.
Windows being replaced, front porches being altered to be bigger, deeper, covered where they weren't, or uncovered if they were. Usually under the guise of livability and adaptability for their expanding family to make, all the
Put a whole
heartstrings.
dining room addition on the front of a house on Riverside. We
Mhm.
took a whole Tudor chimney off of the house in Riverside.
We did. We can do that. I must have been out that week.
Bigger windows.
Uh,
Mostly, like front porch additions. So some people do, the buildings are set back a far distance from the street. So there's a lot of property there. And so we've had applications come through and like, I want to build an addition on the front. Well, additions say they should be to the back, the side, the rear,
Sure.
unless you can,
A really good argument.
really good argument.
Then the other thing is too, if we've had front facades altered incorrectly. It's contributing.
It's already messed up.
Already
right?
messed up, yeah. And so they're trying to bring it back.
Yes.
And that's encouraged, obviously, from the national level down. If they're trying to do a restoration to a historic photo or something, that would exceed the 25%, but it's a stepping stone.
Right.
We don't want you to do this, but if you're gonna do it well, we'll work with you.
Right, well,
Right.
yeah, I mean, in any approach, I mean, and even without the language I suggested, there could be an exception for restorations. And
Mhm.
noted that, yeah, whoever bought this home 12 years ago or whoever, before the historic district did a terrible job and massacred this beautiful home, you want to restore it, go right ahead.
Mhm.
You know,
And that's where we back out of 10/21/30 design review criteria, and you have to go back to. Cause this section is based on doing a rehabilitation, and our code says it's based on rehabilitation, but there's those 4 aspects. So if you're doing restoration, well, actually, this portion of the code doesn't apply.
Mhm.
But we typically use this because that's what's included in our code. And so then staff is like, well, but this is the only thing that's actually verbatim in our code written. Whereas if somebody's doing a full restoration, it's a different aspect of the National Park Service Secretary of Interior standards. So then you're stuck
Yeah.
with, well, but our code does say that we have all those four things, and I think Peter's markups in there said, well, are you identifying which one you guys are predominantly using? Or are we saying that we are still open to these four? Because I know in those opening statements, right, of our public hearing,
Mhm.
of all the criteria of the National Park Service or any criteria that somebody sees applicable to this code, and it's like, well, but staff is only really held
Work off the
to
code.
what's going in the code.
So where does a house like number 7 Tumalo fit? So it's the house itself was built like in 1912 or something like that, and there was an addition put on a flat roofed porch in the 50s. And so is the flat roof porch, is that restoration? Is that,
Look up what house you're talking about.
Yeah.
7 Tumalo?
yeah, I think it's.
Is
7
that the
Tumalo.
brown single story?
No, it's a 2-story craftsman that.
That one, the 4 square?
Nope, it's down the street. That is. Maybe 27 to 1.
While you're doing that, I just want to
Please
mention
feel free
that
to.
Renee Brooke, my supervisor's online, and she had a comment. She said in Santa Barbara, they have the most prominent character architectural styles described in detail as a glossary to the design guidelines, and lists all the features that define that character, which might help someone identify those for their own property. So that's something that could be part of the design guidelines too, is defining those prominent characters and style features.
And going back into the history of the commission, Mike Hauser did a bunch of that too.
Okay,
And he dove in deep on the mid-century stuff as well.
yeah, it was his baby.
Yeah,
Mhm.
but he did a inventory of everything prior to districts.
Okay,
And he broke it down into the different styles that we did have. And he had a nice little synopsis on each bit.
okay,
I don't know where it's gone,
okay.
but that was floating around for a while.
So it was kind of what, maybe like, it's a glossary with the guidelines that had all the features listed that were
Yeah.
prominent. Okay.
Open tails and large bar drafters and
Okay.
this and, you know, the different bits that went into especially with the arts and crafts for him too.
Okay,
When he did the arts and crafts tour back in 2000.
I have some old boxes of Michael's stuff in the
Could be in there.
thing. I'll look in there. Okay. Anything else on this one? You want to keep moving on? So landscaping and the more recent, which is old, code language was visible from adjacent street, AKA if you're it's in your backyard, you can do what you want as far as landscaping. I mean, to a certain degree, like drainage issues or whatever, but it's all about the visibility from a public street, which is not the alley. Because the definition of public street does not include alley. But alterations and new development shall incorporate traditional landscape elements. And what Peter says, unless landscape is listed, what is the purpose for that? Evident in the historic properties in the surrounding areas such as grass, trees, shrubs, and picket fences as applicable. And then inappropriate landscape treatments such as berms and extensive ground cover, inconsistent with historical landscaping of the property, are prohibited.
So Peter's saying we should describe or list traditional landscape elements.
I think he's saying that if it's not listed in the National Register, because there was a special,
Yeah.
cherry tree or whatever, then what do we care? I think that's what he's saying. That's my guess.
No, Bend has a tree code, so number one, trees over certain diameters aren't going away, correct?
Not on private individual single 50 by 100 lots currently. We're working on new tree language. But I don't know the details on that, but right now it's for larger sites and, commercial sites and, private property. And that is not including waterway overlay zone, we have also considered some of those big ponderosa pines, like in the Drake Park, part of the, historic fabric of those lots. So those have been looked at. I mean, those are pretty significant features.
Right.
But they're not particularly listed, I don't think, in the Old Town or the Drake Park nomination. No.
Because they weren't big then.
But I
Some of
think,
them were.
I mean, if the definition of visible, is broadened to include alleyways and backyards, I mean, that may take care of some of it. I think the intent is that you have some landscape back there.
Yeah.
And defining landscaping loosely or broadly. Because it probably varied quite a bit historically. I mean, there's a book, Reading the Landscape of America by May Talgard Watts, which describes the various moves and periods of landscape. And when they were in vogue, because landscape like fashion changed regularly. And architecture. I mean, landscape probably changed more often
Mhm.
than architecture. And, what is a traditional landscape element in Bend?
Would be your time.
Yeah, I mean,
And the reality is, I mean, we just started a new program, the city did to try to get people to stop putting lawns in,
right,
and then,
We were just talking about
Yeah.
that.
and people are pulling the lawns out everywhere on commercial sites and putting in rock and, water efficiency is,
Victory Gardens.
I
down in
was
Bend.
totally gonna go there.
I'm sorry.
yeah.
No, I was gonna say, what do we do when we are faced with the idea that the traditional landscaping of Delaware is, a greenery down each side and people are tearing it up to put in beds for a victory garden.
Yeah.
It's historic.
And I think, it's more the intent of landscape. I think from or my viewpoint at least, on the Landmarks Commission is to buffer and or soften the impact of change or complement the impact of change. A rose arbor or trellis over a gate entrance or on a column next to an entryway may have been something that was very traditional at one point and still would be considered among most people a pretty traditional landscape element. So I think, I think broadening the definition of what's public. There is a landscape code. I'm perfectly okay with seeing a complete xeriscape in a historic district if, for example, use worked stone as bedding elements. Recycle, if you're taking apart some part of an existing house, recycle those materials into the landscape. So that it might be compatible with other codes and things that are going on, that the city is promoting. Decks, porches as part of the landscape. I think, porches, a very traditional historic element.
Mhm.
So if somebody adds on a nice back porch that takes out a good percentage of landscape, but they do it in a style that's compatible with the house
Yeah,
and the period, why not?
right.
Which comes down to the individual review of each property.
I mean, we rarely, at least I've rarely seen a completed landscape plan.
You were out that month. There was one. Yeah.
And when I look at the plans that are there, it's like, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
What am I gonna say? You've got grass and a couple bushes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think,
Yeah, I mean, it's just the balancing act of private property, things, a lot of types of landscaping can change pretty quickly depending on who's living there. And then, from a planning staff planner standpoint, it's the fencing that's the problem as well. It's the location that people put fences, it's the height, it's the style. There's a, big fad of doing horizontal fencing, slats, to, spruce up a place enough to make it look like you could sell it for a lot more. You know, I mean, I don't know. I mean, those are the kinds of things that we have to deal with, but you know, if somebody wants to do a victory garden outside, nobody's complaining. I mean, it was.
Well,
Yeah.
it's reversible.
Yeah, it's reversible, it's easily reversible, and it depends on who's living there.
Yeah,
But the fencing and a lot of these other landscape elements, they're not really enforceable, are they? Like, you can build a fence without a permit.
You can build a fence without a permit, but there is a type 1 review process in the code that says for fencing.
Okay.
And so we do type 1 reviews, so we don't bring them in front of the Landmarks Commission unless they were proposing a horizontal slab plastic fencing, and they were like, that's what I want, and I'm like, I'm not approving that, you can take it to the commission, you know, or that kind of thing. So if they want to push the envelope, but we normally do those, it's a type 1 review, it's pretty simple. And what we do check the height, and that we do in the regular development code, there's the location and height, and a lot of people don't know where their property lines are.
Mhm.
So,
yeah, I mean, you could add to that paragraph, you know, a more complete list, including fencing, edging materials,
Hardscaping.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, you know, I think to get rid of, you know, this, well, there's languages in there again. It's in B2, extensive ground cover. What's extensive ground cover?
Well, when you get down to it, grass is an extensive ground cover. And so
yeah,
it would be great to define that.
okay.
But it is notable that we typically don't review landscape because they don't even have a full landscape plan. Right, so,
Or they say, I'm not gonna touch it, or.
yeah,
Yeah, we're saving as much as we can, the rest will be
We'll
there.
drive the concrete trucks over it, but we're not gonna touch it.
Right,
Yeah,
and
so could we limit this section to just be things that are listed in the description of why it's registered?
I have to say, I don't think a lot of the nomination information's really spent a whole lot of time on the landscaping.
My old house did,
Did it? Okay,
Yeah.
Well,
just the only one I know.
in the overarching
there might be.
national
Okay.
register for the whole district, but the individual clips of each house, they rarely say anything. But so you'd have to look at the. big
Okay,
one.
I'll look at that.
well, and I mean, it also, I mean, things that I've brought up on occasion about lack of any addressment
On drainage.
of stormwater drainage. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, gutters are not compatible with much of the look, so stuff is just running off the eaves into the landscape. You're not technically supposed to put your stormwater on somebody else's property. Kind of hard because most of these areas are fairly flat.
Yeah.
That's what we're seeing now, but with the increase in size, there's a lot more runoff.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Coming off the houses.
Impervious surface, yeah.
I know, I lived in Lake Oswego, council and the planning commission there in code changed the percent of lot coverage in some of their historic districts because people were coming in and taking a 1,000 square foot bungalow and adding on till it was 90% of the lot.
Mhm.
And that stormwater, particularly more of a problem than the other side, but it was creating issues. So I think, you know, maybe, you know, and again, a list of what's not prohibited or what's prohibited or wouldn't be accepted, and maybe just as, you know, Peter's example of, yeah, as a guideline, here are some acceptable
Yeah,
treatments. And it could just be a list with pictures, photographs, just like, you know, I think Peter had done here.
okay.
Same with fences.
Yeah, I mean, well, the wire fences are big. You know, now too.
Yeah,
Wood
in
frame.
the 30s, it was the chicken wire ones.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's period appropriate.
Yep. There's still some out there. Yeah,
Chicken wire, yeah. 6x6 local wire.
yeah. I've got enough to kind of go on there to put some stuff together for next time. Building height. This is one that we've struggled with quite a bit, and Tom has talked about, you know, asking him to you know, see what other places that have small single-story bungalows do when they're dealing with development pressure for 2-story additions. exceed the height of the historic, it's right, it's very, very restrictive. You know, and probably depending on where, I think that the commission's approved two-story additions in the past for several different examples. It depends on where it is and how it shows from the front facade. A lot of them are on hillsides or, you know, going down sloping, so you could do more of a two-story addition. I mean, it's not just black and white.
Like an average roof height versus just to a peak, something to think about, right? So. I don't know, measure from top plate to peak,
Mhm.
adding on. That kind of facade has to kind of match the existing. Right? Even if there are elevation changes, I imagine.
Yeah, that's ideal.
Mhm.
Yeah, and roof height is measured from the adjacent ground. I mean, thinking about those cases where the home may be located on a slope.
Mm.
Is the roof height determined by the lowest point of adjacent ground?
I mean, I would imagine we got a difference between story height and roof height, you know, if it's from the top plate to the peak, I think that's the best way to.
Yeah.
To find roof height.
Yeah.
Because you're right, there are elevation changes, you might have if you're wanting to match roof height, you might have to have a 12-foot plate, because you're, you know, dropping down 4 feet or whatever, and. I don't know, I'm the new guy, so I'm just doing the best I can.
Thanks, Sean.
Learning.
One statement that was removed from this section that we had in here previously was at the end of, you know, or historic buildings in the surrounding area. It used to say the height of buildings on all sides of the altered building shall be taken into consideration.
Oh,
And
I
then-
don't remember that.
Which goes back to the hillside stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so
The height,
the height of buildings on all sides of the altered building shall be taken into consideration. So, you know, when you have, you know, 4 little 1-story bungalows in a row, and then you put this in, but it's not taller than the building, somebody comes back in the surrounding area because there's the 2-story, you know, Delaware Annex over there, the Delaware Grocery. But then this one's a full 2-story, it's gonna dwarf the guy next to you. So taking into consideration what's happening on either side of you.
On all sides, including the alley?
can you send me that? Is that what you're,
Yeah, this is basically like our old one. This is
Okay.
Bigger cities, but
all right.
I was wondering if we could also think about adding where it says, or of historic buildings in the surrounding area, you could add that are visible from the property.
Well, that's a good way of defining them.
Yeah, so they don't go hunting, you know, in the district for a 3-story building somewhere and use that to justify something that's actually quite far away.
Mhm.
right.
That'll make people keep trees, so it's not visible.
To-
Yeah, there you go.
To that end, that goes back to the National Registry stuff, whether it is the facades along the block face.
Yeah,
So
go
that
from the street to street
street
usually.
to street, and you say, okay, these are all single family, single story. You want to have a multifamily 2-story, it doesn't fit that block.
Yeah, even they go, but there's one over there 3 blocks
Yeah.
away, and I'm gonna
Yeah.
copy that one. Okay,
As Gary Johansson, not to pick on him, but he presented to us one time with an addition that was 6 feet taller than the historic. And his logic was that the proportion of standing across the street, it would be the same.
okay.
And I said, if I was in Idaho, I couldn't see it at all, and that'd be better. But, yeah, I'm a big fan of eliminating that last line. It shall not exceed the height of the historic building being added onto. Doesn't matter where it is around the surrounding, you know, it
Mhm.
doesn't get taller than the historic. Cause that was sacrosanct for ages.
Yeah.
And that's difficult when we get back into the whole garage with an ADU above it, even if it's separate and in the back and you can't see it from the front facade,
But
you
that's
know.
supported by saying, find an historic contributing that has an ADU over a garage in the district. There isn't one. Not a historic,
Right,
plenty of them now, but they weren't historic.
there's 1.5-story garages, but not with ADUs. necessarily.
Well, even, I mean, garages are some of the most often modified structures.
Mhm.
Because in most of the historic districts, cars weren't that big, if they were. I remember, I think it was early on when I joined the commission. we looked at a property, I think it was in the Drake neighborhood district. The applicant was an architect, a fellow in the society who'd been on a planning commission, I think in Santa Barbara. And a big part of the application discussion and issues were the expansion of the garage to doubling it and putting in housing over it. I mean, and one statement he made, which I didn't say, it's one of those remarks you think, but you don't say. I'll say it now. Was that they couldn't fit their cars into the garage. And I was thinking, buy a smaller car. And, you know, what car are you driving? A Hummer?
It's funny you say that actually, because if you think about it, this historic timeline, some dang big cars back then.
Yeah.
But it's kind of funny if you think about it. I know it doesn't impact the other, right? But I've got an old Impala, could barely fit in my garage. I understand that guy's pain is what you're saying.
Yeah.
The width was there, but the height wasn't. You know,
Oh, sure.
even a big Bro-Am saloon car still only was less than 6 feet, so. And I think I was actually reprimanded for some of my comments on that case. Actually.
But this is an issue. I know we've had this come up, you know, with the one that was just down the street, the garage with the ADU above it.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, this would be a big change for a lot of the projects we've reviewed.
Yeah.
I guess, would we consider it a change for the better?
Oh, yeah, I would.
Yeah, I would consider it a change for the better. You know, particularly in terms of what this commission is slated to protect.
Mhm.
You know, granted, it may make it more difficult to expand housing in the historic district.
Well, this is a big one we should come back to. I mean, we should keep working on this one because this has huge implications, I think. So number D, building massing. New additions shall be articulated in such a manner as no single element is visually larger than the existing historic building. Very restrictive. Depends on where and how. So I think he's recommending that we try to be more flexible with both of these. This one and the one previously as far as.
Was this, I mean, I have trouble just narrowing that down. Does this mean you can't build a 40-foot chimney? Which would seem logical that you wouldn't. Yeah, because it would be bigger than any other single element.
I don't know if this is true, maybe Derek or Heidi know. I mean, I think when I see this in the code, I think about like some of the houses, the bungalows over like on the west side of the river that have 3 times or 15 times the addition on the back that's 2 stories that kind of dwarf the single bungalow.
Mhm.
Columbia.
You know,
Yeah.
just, yeah, on Columbia or anywhere, just pick a street.
Yeah.
You know, that it just feels like it's stuck on and out of place. And so that's what I think about this. I wonder if this was built, so put in here so that would not happen in the district where you have 2-story additions on a single-story house that's very, very visible from the front facade.
Well, on the one hand, the roof restriction not being taller than the original roof does mitigate some of that problem. But then you get the sprawl and the spread.
Mhm.
But I read this about articulation, so it's not preventing that sort of mass you're talking about, Heidi. It would just be like you have to
Separate.
like break the facade up somehow.
Okay, so if you have, okay,
Here's what the MPS says now. This looks like a new one because it's actually on a web page instead of a copy of a print. About size, scale, and massing of new additions. Size, scale, and massing of a new addition and all of a new addition, missing some words. All pertain to the addition's overall volume and 3-dimensional qualities. Taken together, size, scale, and massing are critical elements for ensuring that a new addition is subordinate to the historic building, thus preserving the historic character of the historic property. Typically, a compatible addition shall be smaller than the historic building in both height and footprint. However, there are other circumstances or considerations that may allow moving away from this basic concept. Due
Wow.
to its location, it may be possible that an addition slightly taller or slightly larger than a historic building may be acceptable, as long as it is visually subordinate to the historic building. In some cases, separating the addition from the historic building with a small hyphen can reduce the impact of an addition that is larger than a historic building. Another way of minimizing the impact of a new addition to a historic building is to offset or step it back from the mass of the historic building. You could simply incorporate
that
that
language.
language and put it right in there.
Yeah. I mean, hell, it goes on for, it used to go on further to say that the addition will be made out of dissimilar surfaces.
Well, differentiating the new addition from the historic building.
Yeah, we used to say specifically.
No.
Let me have that to look at and chew on.
That goes back to, again, stepping back another level is having us differentiate our design review criteria to alterations and additions, new construction, and then demo and relocation.
Yeah, having a
Separating,
section like this for each of
yeah,
those.
separating those back out.
Yeah,
because
'cause
that's
it's really hard to,
That's been a big issue with
Yes.
this is if it's a new condition or an addition, because sometimes it's said an addition. And then you're like, well, this is new construction.
doesn't apply,
so
this
it
does
doesn't
apply, this doesn't apply, yeah, that's a good point.
I would encourage us to look at this updated version.
Yeah,
You can say, okay.
add the language as
Very
a
technical
separate
sentence.
guiding criteria and just reference it, that section in those other sections,
Mhm.
rather than, I don't know, is it?
Say that again?
Wow, okay. I'd say you could possibly take that language and make it its own subparagraph in the design criteria. And then where relevant in the other sections is reference that new paragraph.
Okay,
You wouldn't have to repeat the language, although it may be more, it may be more direct for the applicant to have the language repeated. I know, when I'm doing permits, having a section refer to another section
it's
that's
hard,
200 pages back somewhere else.
yeah, it's hard.
You spend a lot, usually that's when I wish I had more than 2 screens.
Mhm,
Uh,
good
so-
point. Yeah,
Have it italicized as stated in the NPS.
Right,
Softens it, takes it out of your hands. Hey,
yeah, it's a quote. Mhm.
And you just have to
But
make
that
sure you
does-
stay current on the NPS
Yeah.
and which version you're citing.
let me look at that, Heidi,
Okay.
too. Yeah. But this really is just like, these design guidelines are kind of a thrown in for every scenario and they don't fit every scenario cleanly, and that's the problem too. That's where we stumble a lot. Because it says new additions, but not new construction, so what is, but that doesn't apply, but it should,
Can I clarify, within the historic district, are we required to allow ADUs?
it's not, the use is regulated by the development code.
Okay.
From the preservation code, it's about the design.
Okay.
So if you look at the first one here, it says, in addition to the zoning requirements,
Mhm.
the idea is that if the commission looks over to the staff planner and said, is that, you've got the use and the setbacks, right? Okay, well, let's just look at the design.
Okay,
So it's not like you get into it like, no, this ADU isn't allowed here. It's no, this design of this building, and what's inside is up to the development code. Does that make sense?
it does. I'm wondering if our language is too restrictive. And.
For the massing, the building
For the
massing.
massing. Mhm. And then it puts a property in the position where they can't do an ADU where they want to.
I don't think that anything in this language in the design criteria today would restrict the use of something. I
Okay.
mean, I think there's examples of, 1920s tiny houses, in both districts and individually listed. And so
Mhm.
there's probably an opportunity to put something small in there. I
Okay.
think about that project that Beth brought in front of the commission like a year ago that started out as a triplex, but they were very large, and then they decided not to do 3 smaller triplexes, but do a duplex there. I think, you dealt with the massing and the scale and design, and then they decided how they wanted to chop it up inside, how many units, because the zoning allowed, the development code allowed 3 units, but they decided to go for 2 because they wanted larger size units.
Okay.
So,
That's helpful.
yeah.
Does the development code even require ADUs now in some parts of the district?
Required? Or sorry,
Yeah, where it's not zoned for a single family anymore.
so this one is our residential medium density, and this is standard density zoning, and we really don't have with all the new state law development code changes, use changes. You pretty much can do a whole variety of number of uses in the standard density residential zones.
Okay.
So the door is opened wider for people to put in more units. So we're, making it easier for people to put in more individual units. What that looks like, whether it's a duplex or an ADU or a triplex.
Yeah.
It steps away from that, so.
But to Kathy's point, I do worry about if we gave the alleyways equal precedent to the street facade. It seems like it would effectively prohibit ADUs. At least if they're like new construction.
Because,
We would never put an ADU in a front yard of a historic property.
right, unless you kept this language here about the primary facade. I think
Yeah.
that's where if we got into what it looked like, you go back to the exterior features. So maybe that's not the primary facade. The primary facade is not the alley, but that's the one on a public road.
Mhm.
So, so it kind of like separate them. So you got the primary facade. I think what I'm hearing from you is it would be nice to have some exterior feature design so that the ADU in the back is not just a box, that it has more
Yeah.
features to it. So
Give it
that you
some
have more
consideration.
teeth for design for something that's off an
Yeah.
alley.
So
Yeah.
could that be considered a secondary facade?
I think
or
so.
Does that help to clean up the language at all?
Well, maybe if we get into the exterior features, you can have anything that's in the secondary facade or off an alley still needs to have X or something,
It's the same language as a corner lot.
Yeah, which technically it's 2 front yards.
Yeah.
So you can,
It's
Yeah.
still a primary, but there is consideration to the exposed space on the corner.
I think you just include more detailed language in the exterior features even though it's in the backyard, if it's visible from the alley, it needs to look nice. Something in,
Looking at this from an outside perspective, but also working in legal language and code and such. I think maybe I'm wrong. It almost sounds like we need more definitions.
well, okay,
Public way, one for sure,
Mhm.
whether it's right away or public way, that's definite. And
Yeah.
then what is a primary facade? How do you define that?
right.
Secondary facade, how is that defined? Does an alley have to be a dedicated right of way? If not, what if it's just something that's been there forever? Cause I think in some ways, a lot of this stuff should be restrictive, right? Cause the whole intent is to keep those historic. Right? But you can play around, you can dance around this a lot without having certain things kind of codified.
Yeah. And we do have a definition section that's very short and sweet in the code today, so
Right.
we can add that. As we work through some of this potential language changes, we can add definitions that would help. Because as staff planners, we're always looking at the definitions. What is the definition of that, this or that, and how does that define how you're gonna do findings for a certain standard? So, yeah, good point. So, proportion and scale. He liked the 2 sentences that we have in there about the width of new additions and sub-elements such as windows and doors shall be compatible with the related elements of the historic building and with the character of the surrounding area.
Mhm.
I liked some of the language that somebody had about visible from the property, you know, as far as the surrounding area, or, you know, the block, or, you know, what Heidi's gonna send me, with what's in the National Park Service, so maybe I could work on trying to kind of be more specific there, and maybe it's another definition about that, you know.
Yeah, it seems like. I like the way it's written, I mean, that this could be applied to some of those ADUs we see built off of alleyways. Where there's large blank facades, that the height, the width is not proportional to the elements in the historic structure.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, you do need to break up that face.
Mhm.
You do need to add an awning or,
Solids to voids.
yeah,
And maybe it's adding a sentence here that's like, this applies to any additions on an existing historic home or any new secondary buildings that are on the lot.
All structures on a
structures.
historic designated site.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Something like that. Mhm.
That's part of it that's always been missed, is the fact that even if the house is gone, it's still a historic site and it comes to review for what goes back.
well,
Yeah.
that should apply both to contributing and non-contributing.
Exactly.
Cause that's always one I struggle with is, you know, how narrow do I want my interpretation to be
Mhm.
based on whether it's contributing or non-contributing? Is the goal really of the commission to bring every non-contributing up to a point where it's contributing?
In my eyes.
Yeah, it's not stated anywhere in our charter, you know.
There was a
and-
line of it at the NPS.
Yeah,
That's the ultimate goal, is that bringing these non-contributing back towards a contributing status.
well, maybe we ought to make that more public
Mhm.
than referencing somebody to NPS, because I think
Sure.
that's also where I think some of the public have difficulties with the decisions and viewpoint that the commission takes at times. Because they're a non-contributing structure,
Yeah, what's the big deal?
yeah. So, the idea is to get everybody contributing.
We could paraphrase and just say, don't make it worse.
They'll make it worse.
I don't know if this is true or not, but I feel like the commission that this was triggered after there was a non-conforming building built on the back of the Riverside property in the eighties. You know, it was a big blocky structure. And I feel like that was a turning point. And so the whole, if I remember correctly, the whole idea was to bring everything into contributing as opposed to non-contributing. So I do agree with you. I think that the language could be clarified.
Yeah, could that be like a very first thing, like a,
On the proportion and scale, number E.
no, like before A,
Oh,
Like,
before A.
Yeah.
Okay.
stating the intent.
Before
of
this whole
Intent.
section.
Or, yeah, maybe it goes into 10, 20, 10. The
Yeah,
purpose-
the purpose section.
And that the
Yeah.
purpose is to bring non-contributing.
Yeah.
Uh,
To maintain the historic integrity and to bring
Right.
historic non-contributing closer to contributing status.
Yeah.
Yeah. Big.
Okay, I got it. All right. Yeah, those are good suggestions. Anything else on E for now?
Mm.
Okay, so F, exterior features. Peter didn't like the first part, to the extent practicable. That's pretty broad.
Yeah.
Original historic architectural elements and materials shall be preserved.
We got a bunch of dry rot or something like that, it's that.
Could you say we're replaced in kind if
Replacement in kind.
preservation's not feasible?
Oh, but Miss Kennedy, that siding pattern hasn't been made since 1935. How would I do something like that?
Custom building.
That's why it says to the extent possible.
Doesn't this LP look the same as the double clamshell siding that was dominant in the district?
Well, we crossed that on one of the very first applications I heard where there was a discussion about a deck and somebody wanted to use a composite material instead of real wood,
Right,
because at,
ease of maintenance.
yeah. Yeah, and the argument was it doesn't look like wood anymore. I think, and I remember sent the staff examples of newer composites that do actually look like boards
Mhm.
and would be pretty hard to tell the difference between, but I think, yeah, because as I said in my example earlier, Walton, our commission fell prey to statements like that, because they do seem extremely arbitrary and can vary from commission to commission.
Right,
And that's the worst thing a city attorney can be confronted with, is inconsistency.
Right.
In the way a commission applies code. So I think tying to things like availability of material. You know, the health and safety of the structure. And or adjacent structures. You know, that thing's just gonna fall down, and if you built it that way on the existing house.
And that's kind of happened before. Heidi will remember that this garage was intended to remain, but it was falling apart, like where someone in my role walk in and go, we gotta make the call, this needs to be repaired, replaced, whatever, and fortunately, in that case, we're able to preserve what was seen from the alley, you know, the facade, but the rest of it was built safely. So there is that. A lot of these properties are really, really old, right? We're gonna run into that issue, so get the language
yeah.
is good.
Yeah,
Do you guys have a problem with keeping to the extent practical? Because it's up to the applicant to prove to us that it's not practical.
well, I would think if you remove to the extent practically, then as Tom said, you need to add shall be preserved or replaced.
With like materials.
Yeah. You know, yeah, with like, or, you know. Materials similar to those of the existing feature.
And that's dependent on the available materials and the health of the structure, and, you know, like, we could put some language in there like that too. I mean, it's
Yeah.
not like,
Well, because that was, the example was in the old post office building application. We talked about the awning a great deal. I don't want to think we
Right.
talked most about in that application. And the fact that they couldn't cantilever one out because it required bolts going through the structure
Mhm.
that could be visible on the interior, which
Mhm.
also had historic significance.
Yeah.
So it's that, you know, similar materials, and that's why they went with the covered awning that was mounted on posts down the steps.
down the steps. Yeah.
Although I still think they could have done a better, they could have widened that on. Too late now.
Okay. So that's what Peter has for language changes. There's also the foundations and the roofs and the garages. Again, there's language in some of the rest of this chapter about, it's like 4 additions, which goes back to what Heidi said, you know, we need to probably really be clearer about new construction versus additions. Versus additions. I don't understand there's a lot of foundation language about skirting and covering. I don't know, do you have any history on some of that language, and is that still appropriate in here?
On additions to historic national park says make it dissimilar so that you can tell the difference between the original structure and the addition in 20 years. You'll be able to go, oh, okay, here's the line.
Mhm.
There have been projects that have come forward that have shaved down the tough stone to create the illusion with a concrete foundation of the continuation of the tough stone foundation.
Okay,
On the one hand, it gives a homogenized feel to the basement of a building that's been altered. And, you know, it can look nice, but it also doesn't meet with the letter of the law when it comes to the dissimilar surfaces.
Mhm.
So where do, you know, where does that fall?
Yeah,
That one's a tough one for me. I like the idea of being able to hide away a foundation and make it seem like it's always been there, which is, you know, the idea of doing good restoration or remodeling, but
Yeah.
from the National Park standard, it's not what they like.
yeah,
Yeah, and I think, I agree. I think there are other ways to make it clear where an addition starts and the existing stops.
often it's, you know, it's a bump out
We're kind of
or,
like, yeah.
yeah, or bump in.
Trim board, I mean, we've seen that trim board extends down the length of the wall, or as you said, there's a setback slightly at the new addition. So, yeah, the foundation may look homogeneous. But you look at the structure and you can say clearly,
It's
oh,
different.
this was added on.
Mhm.
Um,
It says concrete and masonry foundations to replace deteriorated wood foundations are permitted. I've never seen a wood foundation. I've just seen
Yeah.
rock and
Delaware was a wood
it
foundation.
was, okay.
Arizona Corner of Lava was. one
Okay,
of the
never mind.
skid houses.
I think we could
Got a
strike the
list.
word, we could strike the word wood because you might need to replace your deteriorated
Rock,
foundation of
rubble,
any kind
right,
for structural reasons.
that's a good point. That's what I've seen, I think a lot is just the rubble.
A lot of the garages are just wood.
Yeah.
Okay, sure, they have nothing,
I mean, it's
yeah,
just
that's a good point.
a lot of
The
times
garages.
railroad tie with creosote,
That's a good point. Okay,
but Tom's
Yeah.
right, just pull wood.
yeah, deteriorated foundations are permitted, replacements of deteriorated, yeah, that's clean. Okay,
But are we saying we're not requiring the board skirting? Are we keeping that?
What's it?
such new foundations shall be covered with board skirting or similar treatment to match the original appearance and extend to within 6 to 8 inches of the ground level. That seems very particular, very specific.
Well,
Does that make sense?
you could just strike board skirting and just say with similar treatment to match.
Yeah,
Yeah, because some houses originally may not have had board skirting,
Mhm.
so you wouldn't want to require it to be added.
Such new foundations shall be covered with similar treatment to match the original appearance and extend to within 6 to 8 inches of the ground level.
You see, you're coming across purposes, they're talking about any siding level and skirt board coming down over the foundation to match the original, but if you put a new foundation under. And you've done a 16-inch stem wall, you've got a little bit more
More.
concrete showing. The original line of it is still gonna be up at the sill.
How's it been treated at the Putnam House?
Mm.
They said they were restoring that rock foundation at the Putnam House.
What about the paint seen on some of these foundations?
Yeah.
Is this commission not interested in regulating paint?
No.
By the way,
Or, I mean, we don't say it here, we should talk about, you know, rock and cement shouldn't be painted, right? So we have that in
Brick,
there.
cement.
Yeah, rock,
It's in the national, again, I keep coming back,
Well-
MPS.
You could say, I mean, if you go back to similar treatment is the other part of the foundation painted, was that paint applied later? Was the original, you know, bare stone, which you'd think it would have been?
Mhm.
Cause I don't. And so a painted foundation would not be similar to the existing foundation.
unless somebody painted it
Unless-
like last week, you know, and then, you know, not historic. Probably.
I'd almost say that from such new foundations on could be struck, but. Cause it's all gonna be case by case. Why give too much to confuse?
So just keep the first sentence and then,
I would keep such new foundations shall be
covered with similar treatment to match the original appearance.
Mhm.
How about that? And then scratch the 6 to 8 inches. thing.
Sure.
Somebody can go in with concrete block without that next to a stone.
Sure.
Okay,
Oh, that would give you a clear difference.
Well, this particular A is talking about replacing existing.
Yeah.
So that's on an existing, whereas B is for new additions and C is for new construction.
oh, that's right.
Need not be.
Well, a couple of things, we've been working on this for an hour and a half. And I know this is a work session and we're just getting our feet wet. I mean, we
Well
can,
done.
right, I'm saying, let just, and then what will we have the other 2 items too, to kind of go to.
True.
So I was gonna suggest we finish this and then have a continuation. And I can come back with some other drafts that we can kind of work on. That's right. So, but yeah, I think we should finish this. Like you said, we're almost done.
Mhm.
Foundations is spelled out. Roofs on new additions shall be forms, gables, hipped, etc., that are compatible with the historic building and the historic character of the district.
Mhm. It shall not
That seems
exceed the
clear.
height of the historic structure.
Couple other things that have been removed over the years. B was roofing material shall retain and duplicate original when possible. We have scratched that.
Say that again, roofing materials.
Shall retain and duplicate original when possible. Meaning if it were a shake roof, they had to go back with a shake or a
Yeah.
similar shake. We've kind of let that, we've ditched that line.
Can't even do it in Oregon anyway, so. yeah.
No, but they do
They
have,
have the fake ones.
they have the
down
fake
there,
ones
yeah.
that are
Expensive.
fire resistant.
The
Yeah.
2 ones that I might suggest we add back in, necessary roof mounted architectural features such as dormers, cupolas, cornices, brackets, chimneys, crests, and or weather vanes shall be preserved or replaced.
Oh,
Yeah. And then D, gutter and downspout materials should be appropriate to the building on which they are located and have the same size, shape, textures, and materials as the historic gutter and downspout system.
Which were well, probably, there were probably some gutters over here, but not over here.
I feel like we should add those back in.
That's a
Okay.
good idea.
Yeah.
I'm sending you.
All
these
right, thank
things.
you.
Are solar panels addressed somewhere else? Explicitly or?
We have a type 1 review for solar panels. In the code right now, it says solar panels are visible from a public street, require type 1 review. And so if it's not visible, if it's completely on the backside and not visible from the public street, I would think it's just a building permit.
Okay.
I think that the commission has considered in the past, like, there were some that were visible on the duplex that was reviewed that was best project. I think the idea is that they can be removed pretty easily and you just put more asphalt shingles up and it'll just
Yeah.
disappear. Doesn't affect the
Okay.
architectural.
So if we're reviewing a project with solar panels, should we just ignore that?
I think that it would be nice to say, well, stick them where they're useful, but not as, be discreet as possible.
Yeah, we have, again, I think it was the application with the triplex that went to duplex. They had proposed solar panels on some of the roof exposures. And we did discuss
The location.
the location, because of the visibility to the street.
Mhm. Yeah,
So is
Yeah.
there something in the code we can reference for that?
we should have it in the code, I think.
Yeah.
Because I think I've seen people put, just in life, people put them, like, if they're a flat roof commercial building, they'll put them as close to the front facades as visible as you can, because they're proud of them, right? And, they could be back and not visible, but that's not really what somebody really wants. They want to show them off.
Yeah.
And so there's the location, we should have some guidance in there, I think, by saying, I think, in the historic district, they should be allowed, but if there's some choices, they should be more discreet. Yes.
A covered front porch should not be the
Location.
platform for a solar array versus a south face somewhere else, depending on tree line and depending on efficacy based on shadow and all of that, but
Mhm.
Are we gonna run into trouble if we are considering the alley facing facade, a secondary facade?
So that, I think we need to put something in here. Maybe it's, we don't care. It's the one on the roof, we don't care, like, unless it's the front porch. Or something like
with
that.
with the exception of the primary facade, solar
Yeah.
panels, maybe.
Yeah, maybe we don't care about it.
Yeah,
It was with exception of the front facade.
Yeah.
Okay, front. Something like that.
Yeah, I think, yeah, with the exception of the primary facade, solar panels may be acceptable.
subject to review by the building
Yeah,
department.
unless, you know, as long as they don't replace a significant architectural feature.
Something like that.
Yeah.
You don't take out a dormer and do an array.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because if we were to significantly restrict locations of panels, it could just kill the whole panel project because
Yeah.
they won't have enough power generated.
Yeah.
Right? That's the other thing.
And it is, I think it is something that is considered that it's not permanent. I mean, it can be changed easily.
Well, and nowadays and every day, there are newer and newer types of panels.
Mhm.
That some are, you know, no thicker than a sheet of pane of glass.
Okay.
They're quite efficient. So there's things coming out that, you know, because also, well, a typical approach to solar panels in the past was to put them on stands
Mhm.
in order to change the angle for the optimal gain.
Right,
You know, of the panel.
I actually did a garage in Chamberlain that is 3-tab roofed with photovoltaic. They're a special tile. And they're 6 feet long, and each one has a lead, and we did the
Yeah.
roof with it, so it looks just like a 3-tab roof.
I was gonna ask
Love
that,
that
so they've
idea.
got those Tesla roofs or things
This
like
was way
that,
before Tesla.
right? But would that be allowable under the language to basically your whole roof is a solar panel? They're making this.
Oh, actually, that's a good question because that would be tough to change.
Well,
We don't see them often because they're very expensive
today,
would they be
today. Right,
in shape or form similar to the existing material? Or
shape or form similar, yeah.
so maybe that's the one, the thing that would restrict it.
It looks like a unified field of roofing.
Yeah.
So, just as the 3-tabs did 20 years ago, so.
And I could put in a draft language and it should probably go with the roof section, I think, like as Tom was mentioning, this should be included probably in that section, so, okay. I can work on that, see if I can come up with something. And then, garages and carports is the last one on this section.
should have a paragraph there, shall not be sized for cars larger than a Mini Cooper.
Model A.
Model A, okay.
I mean, these are good ones. I mean, I don't think I've seen a single car garage doors shall be employed. I guess you can have 2 single car garage doors next to each other. Yeah. I mean, it was mostly double car garages that people have gone for.
As long as they find an example of it in the historic district. To
Okay.
support their request.
And given that we may be including alleyways in, man, would it just be sufficient to say where garages are to be renovated or replaced, they shall be designed to minimize their bulk and visual impact? And it doesn't matter what face you're putting it on. I mean, that's, you know, sort of gets, I mean, thinking back to that application, you know, in I guess the Drake, where, I mean, it ended up being a pretty massive, I think some because of slope, but, you know, double car, I think it was double car garage
Mhm.
with a unit over it. I mean, that was a massive
Yeah,
addition to the alley.
Isn't there like a porch that came out on part of it too?
It might have been on the second story of it.
yeah, that was big.
I mean, it was, yeah, it was, oh, it was bigger than my house.
Okay. I'll see if I can come up with something. That one. Including language about minimizing both and visual impact where possible. From streets and alleys. Or primary or secondary or something from all sides, period. Okay,
We do have examples of garages that come in from corner lots on the side. So it would be whichever side they're access to from.
yeah, so I think it just, yeah. Yeah, especially in the Drake Park, there's lots of examples of zero lot line garages. You know, right off Main Street, not the alleys. So
I think that's what our house, well, it's not zero lot line, but it's close. Yep.
so close, okay,
My garage in Georgia was 0 lot line, but it was on lava, not Georgia.
and it didn't, yeah, but it was on the alley, so a lot of them are on the alley.
Yeah, but it faced Georgia.
Right,
for the
I was like, a
door.
lot of them are on the alley, but they don't use the alley, they use the streets,
Yeah.
yeah, that's very common. Okay. I think I have enough to kind of come up with some more language for us to talk about, and then we could. At the next meeting, we could go over some of the comments he has in the code, the other parts of the code that aren't the design review, which is the bulk of what. And then I will look at what Heidi's just sent me and see if I can come up with some more stuff for more reading, more ideas.
Any other comments or questions about item 5, the historic code? Sounds
I
good.
think we had some good discussions tonight. And that's what Renee said too, that's been super intriguing, she said, or something like that. I can't remember, she,
Well, there's an old Chinese curse, may you live in interesting times. Is that what you meant?
Oh, don't we-
I lost my note here, what she say? Super informative or something like that. Anyways, it was for me too. Very interesting. I should have to go back. So, yeah, I think it's a good start. So thank you so much for your time tonight.
Item number 6, reports from commissioners.
May is Historic Preservation Month. We've been talking about
It's historic.
every month is Historic Preservation Month. Heidi.
So, I have a proclamation. Set up for, the city council. They had a ton of proclamations in May, and so we're on the 15th for it. But they were interested in, here's what she said. They're interested, in the past, somebody from the commission has been there to receive it. And, the mayor's was asking whether, let me see if I can find it.
Gonna tell Andy to get a tie.
She was wondering if somebody from else in the community, or if one of the commissioners might have an organization that they're with, that they are part of, that somebody else could do the acceptance of the not proclamation at the,
She doesn't want somebody from the Landmarks Commission?
yeah, let me see.
What about Kelly?
Yeah, the museum.
Yeah,
I can ask her.
that'd be my first thought.
Or, the retired fire department guy that
Barb
works in
Smiley. And Dave Howe.
Dave Howe,
Yeah.
yeah, somebody like Dave Howe. Or Kelly or Vanessa from the museum. That's what I was thinking too. But she was asking for some sort of civic or other civic organization. I'm like, I don't know what that would be, like the Boy Scouts or like, I mean, with somebody that was, like, I'm not sure, but maybe this is a trend with
Paul
the
Clasons.
proclamations,
Yeah, someone
Paul
from
Clasons, yeah.
the local chapter of AIA.
Pat Cleaver.
Okay. All right, that's good. Those are good ideas. So I'll look for somebody to accept the the proclamation, but that's part of the preservation month, so that's what I wanted to get out. So, thanks Heidi.
You don't have anything else to share
Yeah,
Where's,
about Preservation Month?
no,
I thought you were going to do it, I was just. We have a lot of activities planned next month.
Yeah, we decided that we're not gonna do a kickoff event on First Friday in May in Bend. Because the museum has something else going on that night, an opening celebration of,
Some exhibit at the library,
yeah.
so that's gonna happen on Saturday.
So they're having their opening, so all the museum people aren't available to help out. We are still having a kickoff in Redmond on Thursday night. They're gonna do a Hunt for History walk and a kickoff at their first Friday, that Friday night. So they're doing
First Thursday.
Thursday or the first Thursday, right? What I have volunteered to do, we've done scavenger hunts downtown before. This year, our theme that we decided is gonna be about windows because of all the window restoration work that's been going on. And we're gonna do a windows into the past scavenger hunt. So we'll make those up and I'll distribute them to businesses downtown and people can see it and then have a QR code or maybe Charles out of Redmond is gonna make postcards. So we'll have postcards and little event flyers that we'll pass out to businesses downtown. So at least there's something going on for the first Friday in Bend. And then I guess depending on when we get those, if other people here have resources to distribute flyers and information out, that'd be great.
But we have lots of activities planned, including Michael House is gonna come back and do a talk on barns.
Yep.
okay,
For the museum they have a talk, usually 10 times of the year or something, and so he's gonna be their speaker in May.
that's cool.
And then the church has been restoring all of their windows. Maybe you saw the article in the bulletin about how they found the original company that put in the windows. So Saron in our office has been working on that project from the planning historic review side, and so they're gonna have an open house, so we're gonna advertise that, so that we're like, you've got to have somebody there and talk about it, and so we're gonna try to do that in May. Lots of things. And
Greenwood Cemetery Tour, the Hollingshead Barn, I just found the email.
Yep.
Archaeology Roadshow.
Yep.
Little Did You Know by Michael Waller. And
Yep. That's the Oregon Daily, I think.
Yeah.
He does that, yeah.
we'll have our street signs. Redmond is also doing a Women in History sometime that month. Hopefully the Tetherow walking tour again.
Yeah, we're gonna have banners for Preservation Month up kind of like near Bonta and kind of in that little zone of downtown.
Where's
From
this
there.
link?
We won't have it yet.
Oh,
It'll be on the.
It'll be on the museum, and I will
Kids
forward it
County.
on to you.
okay.
So we've had one meeting that's like kind of gather what everybody's doing. And so the museum has a event page on their website that has a list of everything that goes on in May. And if you go to their museum website now, it's got all of 2023 stuff on there. And so they're trying to kind
okay.
of pull it together and then get that up there before May. So we're still working on it,
Okay,
but yeah.
Very cool.
yeah.
You had, Derek, you had a volunteer
Yep,
idea.
Volunteer idea.
well, backstory on it. 13 years ago, I was asked to pick up gleaned food from Newport Market and find some place to bring it and do something with it. For a while, I fed the horses at the sheriff's department, the rescued horses, and it's taken shape over the years, but basically for the last 12 years, every Monday and every Thursday at about 8:30 in the morning, I pick up cases and cases of food and bring it over to the Quimby Street apartments where people are living on fixed incomes, about 60 families. And after 12 years, they're fairly used to me showing up. With the pending move, one of the hardest things has been one to let go of that because it's been a nightmare that I love doing each week. Every Monday I wake up and I think, God, I gotta go do the food. And then I'll have some little old lady come out and say, I didn't know how I was gonna make it through the month. And so it's very rewarding. But with the pending move for Beverly and I, I'm looking for my replacement. And it is a hell of a commitment. Every Monday, every Thursday, 8:30 in the morning at Newport, having a vehicle that can pick up large banana boxes full of food. I mean, and they will help from the store, but there's produce, dairy, sundries, bakery, there's just there's a lot of stuff. And it comes with one little caveat, which is on Mondays, it has to go to the grandmother of the current owner of Newport, Ev, who is 93 years old and is amazing. 8 generations Oregonian. She is a wealth of history and is a sweetheart. And I love dropping things off to her. That's just my Monday morning routine, is hanging out with that for a little bit. But I am looking for somebody to take this over. It's been wonderful, but I can't let it stop. So there's too many people counting on it. If anyone or anyone you know might be retired with a pickup truck who likes to talk to old people. Something, I don't know how to define it really, but it's something that I'm on the search. So keep it in mind.
I'll ask my neighbor.
Really?
She would probably dig doing that.
It's awesome. It's an awesome gig. It really is. It's been, there are times my truck smells like bananas for a little while, but there are times when I've spilled sushi in my car. We won't talk about that, but something spilled sometimes.
Oh, that's good. You might have somebody that might be
That'd be,
intrigued.
Mhm. Yeah.
That's really
yeah,
cool.
just give me a buzz. Happy to talk to them
Yeah.
about all of the details. It's,
Okay.
I mean, yes, it does include holidays. When I got my pacemaker, I found coverage to get people to help me because I couldn't lift the boxes. But it's been 12 years plus, so 13 years. Yeah.
I was thinking like, a lot of the high schools, because my son just graduated last year, it's like they all have volunteer duties, but then it's so cyclical, and I'm thinking, well, some young kids that, but then they're not gonna have that longevity, and that long commitment, so.
If
Organization.
you
that
haven't,
high schools might be able to
contact
do it,
the
though.
Council on Aging.
My mother's a board member, but she hasn't been of any help. So, yeah,
Okay, sorry.
I've done that.
Or Ben Parks and Recreation, the Larkspur Center and the Senior Center, they do Meals on Wheels.
Mhm.
So they already have an infrastructure that's built that could help.
That's a good thought.
Linda and I, we are part of the Green Bag Food Project.
Mhm.
See that.
And I know their volunteers are pretty dedicated. They drive around. It seems to be, at least once, I think a month or so, and pick up bags of new groceries and things for
Mhm.
people. There might be people amongst that
Would you take that on?
would take the interim stuff that they don't do monthly on as
That's a good call.
All those good ideas.
Yeah, no, I'll look into both of those. All 3 of those. Yeah, it's been pressing on me for a little while here.
sure.
So, yeah, I've been doing it long enough that you get to know the backstory on some of these people. They're in their 80s, they're in their 90s. Beyond Ev, who, like I said, she is amazing with her history of the area and the one-room schoolhouse and growing up in Redmond and Bend and the farm and all of that. But yeah. I appreciate your consideration on that. Thank you.
No further business.
I was about to swallow the thought.
Move to adjourn.
We have a motion to adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second.
Between Kathy or Tom? Who was first?
Jim was first.
I
And
made the
then-
I
motion.
mean, but
On the
who was
second.
the first on the second?
Who's
Who's on
on
first?
first?
Add one voice together.
He's on third.
Okay, was it Tom? Was,
Kathy can have it.
okay, Kathy.
Kathy's got it.
right.
We are adjourned.
Thank you, everybody, for your time tonight.
What's the date of the next meeting?
It's always the, I think it's the 21st.
21st?
The Highland one. No, I saw another
I'll be in
Derek.
Ireland.
Oh, my gosh. Okay,
541.
thanks for letting me know.
It's all 9 hours.
610.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can check in, right? The 7 in the morning.
There you go.
I don't know.
I'll send you a Zoom invite.
Yeah, there you go. Or be in a pub or something.
Thank you.
So does this commission email back and forth about